something that was important? Was it something that's not so important? We're going to look at some Bible stuff, and I'm going to give you an answer here real shortly. And I just want to, before we get into our last feast that I look at, just so you're kind of aware of things. All right. So the Bible seems clear in Colossians 2:14. In him you were circumcised with the circumcision made without hands. Isn't that a good idea? Right?
Yeah.
Circumcision made without hands. Of your heart, putting off the body for the sins of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ. To feast or not to feast. Having wiped out the handwriting of requirements that was against us, to which was contrary to us, and he's taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. So let no one judge you in food or drink, in regarding a festival or a new moon or Sabbath, which are a shadow of things to come, but the substance of Christ. Now we stop there for a second. So often I've heard, and if you're familiar with Seventh-day Adventists and this stuff, a lot of people think they're just talking about the Sabbath there. You know, do you keep the day? Do you not keep the day? Whatever it is, I'm going to keep my own day. Don't judge me. That's not the context at all. I mean, this has gone on forever. Should you keep the feast? Should you not keep the feast? What should the Gentiles do? Should they follow after the ways of the Jews or not? Okay? And so, the Bible seems clear in certain areas about this. But looking at it, it's talking about those feasts. That's the context for that verse. Okay? That's the context of it. Those feasts and what's going on there. So they weren't supposed to judge each other. Alright? That's the most important thing, I think, to glean out of all this. No matter what someone chooses to do or not to do, that you don't go back, you're wrong, these people are like this, they're like that. You don't need to do that. There's only one judge. Last I checked, and that was our God. Alright? So, but I want to look through some other things here, looking at the idea of to feast or not to feast. Let's go to the next one. Specifically the ritual aspect of Israelite worship that ceased in the Christian faith. Okay? And I'll explain why. Because there was a new covenant, and the old covenant was to be done with. Like the old way of doing things, the things that led to and pointed to Christ's fulfillment. Right? We talked about how Christ was the Passover, Christ was the unleavened bread, Christ was the wave sheet. We talked about the Day of Atonement and how Christ fulfilled those things. Right? The whole purpose was Him. All right? The whole purpose of keeping those things was about Him and being with Him, not just adhering to a certain day or practicing a certain ritual. All right? The Jerusalem Council dealt with this, and you can look through this, and if you're taking notes, I didn't even pass that with you. Awesome. All right, so someone pass you that for me? Thank you. Thank you much. So,
thank you.
So you look in, the Jerusalem Council, they dealt with this. They were wondering because there were some people, there were Jews at the time that said the Gentiles should keep these days, they should keep this thing. And so they had to meet together and decide what should they do. All right? And you might be like, and this is just more of an informative thing. I want you to be, I'm aware of it. When God uses Paul to settle this issue, looking at it, let's go to the next one. One man esteems one day above another, another esteems every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. He that regards the day regards it unto the Lord, and he regards not the day to the Lord, he doth regard it. Again, this is not talking about, like today, present day, we take it and go, are you going to keep the Sabbath? Well, my Sabbath is Sunday, or my Sabbath is Friday, or my Sabbath, whatever day you choose. That's not even the context. The context is feasts and following God's stuff. At that point, it had nothing to do with that. Okay? Because that was a common practice. All right? So God used Paul to settle this issue of peacekeeping. Let's go to our next slide. For he is our peace, who hath made both one, believing Jew and Gentile, and hath broken down the middle wall of partition. You may have read this before. All right? There's peace between everybody, and everybody is one. Having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments contained in ordinances, for to make himself twain one new man, to make him peace. All right? And I can go on and on and on. There's other verses here. You might want to write those down. Next verse, Ephesians 2:15 and Colossians 2:14. Plainly teach that ceremonial system of Israel. which include all the rituals and all the festivals and all the feasts that centered in the temple sanctuary, was abolished. Okay? You may disagree. The great thing is it's not an issue of salvation. If you make it one, why I'm afraid you may be on the wrong side, because then it has to do with your works and your beliefs. And we talked earlier, it's based upon what you did. All right? Was blotted out by the atoning death of Jesus. When coming with feasts and proving whether or not you have to do them or not do them, you have to sometimes use strange teachings, I think. Let's go to our next one. Some people think, well, a large church changed this. Or there's a conspiracy. Or new life is going to bring the return to Jesus. You have to know the Torah and you have to know the Jewish writings. And you need to know Hebrew. Because if you don't use Hebrew, you can't even say God by His name. And you're already messed up there. And it's a salvation issue. Like I said, you can go on time. It ends up being a salvation issue. You do it or not do it. Biblical research, we look at this next one. The centralized, and this is really key, I think, when you look at it. I said I wouldn't quote anybody through this series, but I'm going to quote someone on this, because he's much more scholarly than I am. Okay? And the centralized place of worship was indispensable for the celebration of at least 3 festivals. Okay? You had to be in Jerusalem, and you had to be at the temple in order to keep the feast. At least 3 of them. Okay? Had to be. You couldn't do it without it. Exegetically, you can't do it without it. And some of you are still looking at me going, what are you talking about? For those of you that study this stuff, you might know what I'm talking about. The celebration required from the people to go to the temple in Jerusalem to celebrate those festivals. That was back how it was to be celebrated. If the centralized place of worship disappeared, then the feast would end. It could not be celebrated independent of the temple. Okay? Something to think about. Right? In your own walk. Next verse. Is it exegetically impossible to separate the feast from the sacrificial system? I mean, exegetically, you can't separate it. You have to be there with what they're doing. So, last slide, at least for this section. People have freedom to feast or not to feast. That is the question. To feast or not to feast. You can if you want to. Some of you are still looking at me like, I've never even thought about doing that. And that's okay. And some of you are, and thinking about it. The thing is, they're not supposed to be a judge to anyone. It's not necessary. And that's one thing I want to say. It's not necessary. If you want to do it, do it. Okay? But don't judge anybody because they don't, and don't judge anybody because they do. And that's what Paul had to say. Is that clear? All right. Yes?
So I'm just wondering, I know you're saying that, according to the verses or whatever, you're showing me the why that's such a problem. You say do it or don't do it, but you're obviously showing that the decree is not necessary anymore because Christ says you think there's something wrong in doing it, or just if you're feeling like you're doing it because it works, you have to do it, like you've been brought up that way.
I think motive is the key to the whole thing. If you feel like you have to, because you get a double blessing or whatever, there's always keep asking the questions that go back, why? Why? Now, some people do it just to, when you stop and think about it, as we have this weekend, they're amazing things. Christ was the Passover. He was the unleavened bread. He was the wave sheet. He was the first fruit to everybody that's going to be resurrected. He was fulfilling the Day of Atonement. And, it's kind of like all the way through is about Him. So it's awesome. And so as you study these things, people are inspired by it, and they dig into it, and they're like, wow. And, then it's like, well, let's keep them. Go ahead.
You're not saying it's biblically wrong to keep the feast. You're just saying,
Right. As far as necessity, it seems that Christ fulfilled those in His life. All right? That He fulfilled them. That's what it's all about. It was about Him and Him fulfilling them, not us fulfilling them. Right? It wasn't about what we did. It was about what He did. All right? That makes sense. And for the last feast of Bible prophecy, we're going to look at, let's go to our next one. Again, we looked at Leviticus. Oh, did we? Totally good. All right. Keep going. These are the feasts of the Lord, holy convocations, which you shall proclaim. All right? Which you shall proclaim at their appointed times. Remember, appointed times were not just holidays. They were more than that, and they pointed to something. They were prophetic. Let's go through these quick, TJ. The Passover feast, we talked about those. Prophecy, the death of Christ. The Feast of Unleavened Bread. The Feast of Wave Sheaf. The Feast of the 50th, Pentecost. Okay, you guys have heard of Pentecost before? Where Christ was seated at the right hand of God and poured out His Spirit upon all men because of it. All right? The blowing of the trumpets. The possibility of that occurring sometime before 1844. And the Day of Atonement where Christ was fulfilling that. Yeah, just keep kind of moving. We've talked about all those. So next we're going to look at the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay? Leviticus 23. The Feast of Tabernacles. And here's the thing. This is supposed to apply to your life. This is not supposed to be information, and I really hope that in the next 10 minutes or so, you are like, I'm glad I knew that. This is awesome. All right? So, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, The 15th day of the 7th month shall be a feast of tabernacles for 7 days to the Lord. Leviticus 23:36. On the first day there shall be a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work on it. 7 days you shall offer an offering made by fire to the Lord. On the 8th day you shall have a holy convocation, fire to the Lord. And you shall offer an offering made by fire to the Lord. It is a sacred assembly, and you shall do no customary work on it. And it goes on. And also the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the fruit of the land. Notice that, when you've gathered in the fruit of the land, you shall keep the feast of the Lord for 7 days. It seems like a lot of things they had to do, right? Imagine like every 7th month they had to do all these things and bring all this stuff in, and that would. They did this and they enjoyed doing it. Let's go to the next verse, Leviticus 23:40. And you shall take to yourselves on the first day the fruit of the beautiful trees, branches of palm trees, boughs of the leafy trees, and willows and brook, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. You shall keep it as a feast. Keep going. To the Lord for 7 days in it. All right? A statute forever in your generation. You shall dwell, next verse, you shall dwell in booths. Little tents. And all who are native Israel shall dwell in booths. And you know that I made the children of Israel dwell in booths when I brought them out of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. All right? Stop there for a second. Well, what is it talking about doing? All right, discuss that at your table. All right, what is it talking about doing? What is happening here? It's the end. There's